Ladies and gentlemen, UN's top court, the International Court of Justice, has dished out a little bit of justice. They are ordering Israel to halt military operations in Rafah. Of course, Israel is not going to comply with that. Let's be for fucking real, but here it is.
I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. We begin in The Hague, where judges at the International Court of Justice, that's the United Nations top court, have just ruled that Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and other actions in Rafah, citing the immediate risk to the Palestinian people. It also ruled that Hamas must immediately and unconditionally release its hostages. Let's listen to what the judge who was speaking in the past half an hour had to say.
Under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole.
What? Do you think that Hamas has made threats against the UN court and that's why they're ruling on it like this? No, I don't think that. I think it's because Israel's actions are so genocidal and so apparent, like so flagrantly genocidal, which is weird to say. I guess there's like a level of genocidal sentiment and ideation that you can engage with that basically is considered to be, something that you can turn a blind eye to. That is the reason why I believe they're doing this, though. I think that they are doing this not because they're threatened by Hamas or some shit. If anything, they're more so threatened by America. Like literally, America is openly antagonistic to both the ICC and the ICJ at this point, and the UN, and anyone and everyone that dares go against Israel. It's pretty crazy the circumstances that we're experiencing. It's like if all of these international organs of justice that we created in the aftermath of World War II existed pre-World War II, and like Nazi Germany was the hegemonic superpower and utilized those organs to basically conduct its genocidal affairs and use those international courts and these international organs of justice to basically prop up whatever the fuck they were doing and legitimize whatever the fuck they were doing. It is actually crazy.
Or in part. The court recalls that in its order of January 26, 2024, it ordered Israel inter alia to, I quote, take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, end of quote. In the present circumstances, the court is also of the view that in order to preserve.
They can demand it, but does that mean Israel will have to listen and halt military offensive? No, Israel will not have to listen. This is not about like who has the power. There is only one group that has the power. There's only one country that can enforce any kind of regulation in this process. That country is the United States of America. Its refusal to do so means that Israel has the go ahead and will continue to do whatever the wants to. The UN doesn't matter. The ICJ doesn't matter. The ICC doesn't matter. None of this shit matters. If the rest of the world could universally say, no, fuck Israel, they're not allowed to do this, it's bullshit. And if America said, you're wrong, Israel gets to do whatever it wants, then Israel could do whatever the fuck it wants. However, this is still incredibly significant, just like the ICC arrest warrants and the application even of an arrest warrant for an Israeli leader is massively consequential, massively significant, a genuine sea change. This is also massively consequential and very significant. Why? Because it is yet another step in the right direction. It is a change of course from international organs of justice. It is going against American hegemony. All of this is very important. Even if the Security Council decided, well, in a world where, let's say, America had removed themselves from the Security Council and the UN Security Council decided to enforce a ceasefire, Israel could still do whatever the fuck it wanted to. The only reason why the UN Security Council and its decisions would be important is because America's on the Security Council, and when America doesn't veto a thing against Israel, that means America is openly stating Israel has gone too far. That's it. If we undermine the significance of this, there's a corollary question for people to ask themselves. What does a protest directly accomplish? Yes, this is massively consequential, just like all of the protests are massively consequential. All of this is important. Like I said, there are many different vectors of pressure, and it is important to hit this issue on all fronts. Okay, public pressure in the form of protest and international pressure from these organs of justice, from leaders of countries in the Western world, leaders that are firmly inside of the imperial core. All of this is massively important in moving the needle in the right direction.
Israel must take effective measures to ensure the unimpeded access to the Gaza Strip of any commission of inquiry, fact-finding mission, or other investigative body mandated by competent organs of the United Nations to investigate allegations of genocide.
It's really that the International Court of Justice is not doing what it's supposed to do, which is just shut the fuck up and allow us and our allies do whatever we want and never criticize us or our allies. So I don't really understand what's going on here. The rule-based international order is falling apart right in front of our eyes, everybody. It almost feels like it was fabricated specifically to make liberals feel good about the potential rules and order that we were dishing out. Also, the U.S. judge at the International Court of Justice, Sarah Cleveland, voted in favor of today's order for Israel to halt its offensive on Gaza's Rafah. Biden nominated Cleveland to the State Department's legal advisor in 2021, but she was never confirmed. When elected to be an ICJ judge last November, the top U.S. diplomat, Secretary Blinken, praised the court as a guardian of international law, and Biden had said the ICJ was one of humanity's most critical institutions to advance peace around the world. But what you fail to recognize there is that back then we were using the ICJ against Russia as God intended, as America intended. For years and years, I have told you, and many of my naysayers got so mad every time I said all of these international organs of justice and many of the actual NGOs, for example, 100% up until the October 7 were simply operating at the behest of the American interests, at the behest of America's State Department interests. Everyone would immediately go, Hassan, how dare you say that? These guys are abiding by the rules. There's like standards that we're setting. No, those standards have always been historically used against whoever we declare war on, while we openly violate said standards on a regular basis. And now you are seeing it. You're seeing that reality. You are experiencing that reality in broad fucking daylight. The one time that these courts are actually doing their fucking job evenly, okay, with minor criticisms, by the way, not even taking maximalist positions that I would take in the face of actual ethnic cleansing, you're seeing that global order fall apart. The idea that we care about said global order falls apart. Of course, if you were a child, maybe didn't recognize that none of this shit mattered when we already had a law in the book since 2002 that says if any of our guys or allies are ever prosecuted for war crimes at the Hague, at the ICC, we will literally invade a NATO nation. We will invade the Hague. That is the law since 2002. Why did anybody ever even care about the notion that America actually cares about democracy and cares about defending peace in the world and yada yada yada?
But when it comes to the order to halt the Rafah offensive, I think we can expect a big fat no from the government here. And I think
it is pretty ridiculous, by the way, that the ICJ currently is basically reasserting the red line that the American government put on Israel. It's not like they're saying halt all operations in Gaza. They're saying red line, American red line of invading and like sieging Rafah is a red line that we would like to enforce. And yet that is a bridge too far for Israel again and again and again. It's very odd. What will America do? A very tricky position, considering that Joe Brandon himself said that this was his red line. Let's see how the American government reacts to it. Seems to me that the BBC is being more skeptical of the anti-Semitic claims made by Israel. Am I just imagining this, or are they finally caving to the left a tiny bit? They're not caving to the left, man. It's just unconscionable. Israel's actions are truly unimaginably cruel. So cruel that, yes, these guys who actually care about maintaining the presence of order and an international rule-based order have to inevitably say, okay, well, they're kind of up a little bit. There is no caving to the left. It's just caving to, I guess, reality.
David Mensa, who's a spokesperson for the Israeli government, did give some reaction to the news to the BBC, and he said there is no power in the world that will push us to commit a public suicide, because that's what this is, to stop our war against.
I do love how dramatic Israel is. Like they have a penchant for drama that I do appreciate. You know, if they weren't deploying this at the behest of their genocidal ambition, I would laugh and enjoy it.
Hamas, we understand the Israeli government are meeting or going to be meeting soon to discuss this ruling. We've also had reports on Reuters of Hamas reaction. Hamas apparently calling on the UN Security Council to implement the ICJ Court of Justice decision, welcoming the ruling and welcoming the call for an investigation, an inquiry, saying that they would cooperate with that. Also, we've had a response from the Palestinian Authority saying they welcome the decision, as again reported by Reuters news agency, saying that it represents an international consensus to end the war on the Gaza Strip, according to a Palestinian presidential spokesperson. We will keep you across all the reaction. Of course, we're going to be looking to the US to see what...
Am I correct in assuming anyone who trusted the U.S. before this genocide don't trust or like the U.S. anymore? We're showing our ass to the whole world. I mean, not necessarily. I think a lot of people secretly recognize that America being the world police is like really damaging for people who are on the other side, who are experiencing America's actions and America's allies' actions, but they don't really give a shit about it because the current order, the current standing benefits them personally. That's it. I think a lot of people personally recognize that. They just don't care. A lot of liberals in America and a lot of people in the Western world recognize that America's actions are truly unconscionable since World War II, since the aftermath of World War II, but it benefits them, so they don't really make too much of a stink about it, or at least they feel like it benefits them, so they don't make too much of a stink about it. And yet they still try to maintain this liberal posture that they actually do care about some sense of order. There's always this conflict when the enemies are voiceless, dehumanized groups of individuals from countries that you don't give a shit about. That's one thing. When America's doing the violence and the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and can portray its enemies successfully as like criminal terrorists that are not defending themselves and their nation against a foreign invasion, but instead these are people who are just like, they want the West to burn and they hate us and they're American phobic or whatever the which America was successfully able to portray its war on terror, its failure of a war on terror, its destabilizing, incredibly inhumane war on terror as such. It's one thing. People just kind of shut the fuck up and go along with America's imperial ambitions. The situation is a little bit different when it's not just America doing it, but an extension of America doing it. And the extension of America is doing it in broad daylight with American weapons, with American permission, and also doing it in a way that is even more violent than what America has done, which is unimaginable. It's kind of crazy to think that what Israel is doing, is so completely and wholly unacceptable, because under international law, Israel obviously does not have a right to defend itself in a territory that it already occupies as a belligerent occupier, right? Like, it just does not. It's not like America was already occupying Afghanistan and then chose to bomb the shit out of it, right? It occupied it for 20 years and it was unconscionable, it was unjust, it was inhumane, a litany of war crimes there, destabilized the entire region. However, even then, the civilian to enemy combatant casualty numbers were nowhere near as bad as what Israel has done in such a short time frame. So ultimately, Israel has been able to basically move the needle in the worst direction, even taking it further than what the United States had done. Here is DW News covering it as well.
Has ordered Israel to stop its military offensive in the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. The United Nations top court described the humanitarian situation there as disastrous and ordered Israel to allow unhindered access of aid. Israel has repeatedly said it has the right to defend itself from Hamas militants and is unlikely to comply with the ruling. The court also ordered Israel to report its progress in applying the measures within a month. The ruling was in response to a request from South Africa. Though the court has no way to enforce its decision, the ruling does add further international pressure on the Israeli government. Well, let's look at what this might mean with Mark Weller. He's Professor of International Law and International Constitutional Studies at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Welcome to DW.
Is that true, what he said, that the court has no enforcement mechanism? Yeah, it is true. But it doesn't matter because it's still very important, because the court is a very important part of the international rule-based order. And that is precisely the reason why, obviously, we have Americans in the court. And like when Professor Sarah H. Cleveland was elected to the International Court of Justice, Secretary of State Blinken in 2021 literally praised the court as a guardian of international law. And Biden said the ICJ was one of humanity's most critical institutions to advance peace around the world. I think that we forget that a lot of this stuff, a lot of diplomacy, a lot of politics is like obviously held together by enforcement mechanisms, violence, imperialism, and that sort of thing. But there is definitely an aesthetic side of this as well. The optics of this has to stick. And I've been chirping about how these institutions simply work at the behest of American interests for decades, and for decades it has been true. But there is a level of, I guess, pain tolerance that Israel has definitely crossed. That threshold has been crossed. One, partially because Israel is not the United States of America. America gets to do whatever the fuck it wants, but Israel does not have that same leeway, does not have that same bandwidth. And two, it is an occupier that is doing this to the occupied population. Like, even when you think about another American ally, imagine if Nazi Germany had the support of the world's strongest superpower, that's Israel. Wake up. Wait, what? Oh, he's saying, imagine if Nazi Germany, I already made that. Okay, I already made that comparison earlier. By the way, that could have happened. Like, we were kind of close to that. If the business plot had succeeded, we would literally be doing that. We would be living in that world right now. And who knows what would have happened. It's not just Pearl Harbor. It was even before then. America went through its own capital owners having fascist ambitions moment as well.
Israeli citizens suffered terrible atrocities on October the 7th last year. Is the government of Israel argued in court that it's taking exceptional measures to minimize harm to the civilian population in Gaza. Today's ruling does seem to indicate that the court sees things rather differently.
Well, Israel is, of course, entitled to the right to self-defense in response.
Dude, I saw comments with thousands of was talking about that Patton, we fought the wrong enemy quote, tried to say it was Nazi apology and they got downvoted to hell. We're cool. Oh, yeah. This is why I do personally believe that while Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, fell apart and Nazi Germany lost in World War II, fascism absolutely won. Fascism as an ideology, as an ideological tool, was immediately we love taking up the mantle of all of that nonsense. We absolutely have genuinely continued that tradition, both in our domestic affairs, certainly, and absolutely when it comes to our international enforcement.
To the horrible, atrocious events of the 7th of October, but the right to self-defense is not unlimited, and it can never transgress humanitarian law, the law that supports the dignity of human persons, human beings, in any circumstance, even in war. And the court has now spoken for the third time in just...
You have to remember, it's you're saying, I can't believe that a professor is peddling the Israel has a right to defend itself narrative. This is the German broadcaster. You're watching the German broadcaster. It is not even remotely shocking that the German broadcaster is doing that. For a lot of self-serving reasons, modern Germans are unconditional riders of the state of Israel. Some of the reasons for that are, of course, the collective guilt of the Holocaust, but I think that the real reason, the real nefarious reason, is that there's a lot of Islamophobia in Germany, and a lot of people spiritually, holistically, I think, in Germany, see Israel and a defense of Israel and the collective, antiquated, ancient, epigenetic anti-Semitism of the Arabs that they believe and repeatedly reinforce as a way to kind of move the attention away from the unimaginable wrongs that the German state dished out against Jews during the Holocaust. It's a way to really sidestep the Holocaust, to be like, no, you know who's the real anti-Semites actually? The Arabs, the Muslims. I think that's what it is. That's a major reason for why they are such unconditional riders for Israel. It's great. It's great for them because now they're like, you know who the real anti-Semites are now? Arabs, Muslims.
Just a few months, which is unprecedented, ordering Israel the first time not to do anything which could constitute acts of genocide against the people of Gaza, the Palestinians.
Yeah, it's not just in Germany. This is an attitude across Europe, 100%. And this is not an attitude across Europe for like all working class individuals in Europe. It's just like the elites in Europe have this kind of attitude. Academics, those in positions of power, capitalists across the board, oftentimes love transferring the guilt of like collective anti-Semitism in the form of pogroms from every single European country and Russia as well, Tsarist Russia, and transferring that collective anti-Semitic actions and all of the guilt that they feel about their historical anti-Semitism, transfer that over to the Arabs and the Muslims in general.
The second time, it has ordered Israel to ensure that there is full humanitarian access, and now, almost unprecedentedly, it has ordered a state claiming to be in the middle of a self-defense operation to halt a major element of that campaign, its Rafah offensive. Israel has been arguing, we have been a model of humanitarian law compliance, but with all of this evidence, those arguments ring increasingly hollow, as most people who watch television, of course, already know.
Okay.
But once you have these authoritative findings from the highest judicial bodies in the world, it is much more difficult for Israel to maintain its position that it is, in a modest way, defending itself.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's a wildly long trip to take to arrive at the conclusion that you could arrive at by watching like one video from a Palestinian person. And before you say, yeah, they're biased, it's like, I don't even mean that. Like, just like look at Gaza. That's it. That was the reality that even Western journalists that were onboarded with the IDF when they took trips into Gaza, that was the reality that they met on the ground. It's not just the International Court of Justice or the ICC or all of these other organizations being like, well, Israel, you're really expending all the political capital and good nature that you had. What's happening here? Like, nah, just look at anything. Just look at Gaza. And to be fair, looking at Gaza, even from afar, from Israeli territory, was declared so unconscionable that the Israeli government actually moved to take down the Associated Press feed of Gaza. Why? Well, for the crime of actually Al Jazeera, which they had already shut down inside of Israel because they're the most moral nation on the planet, remember. Al Jazeera was using the Associated Press live feed.
Does this ruling impose any duties or obligations on any other signatories to the court to do or not do anything? I'm thinking of the United States, amongst others, who it could be argued are supplying Israel with the wherewithal to carry out the activities that the court has now prohibited.
Funny you should say that, as of course you are hinting at. Germany is at present subject to a case in the International Court of Justice where Nicaragua has argued that the continued provision of arms by Germany to Israel violates the Genocide Convention. And for a state like Germany, which prides itself as a model of compliance with international law on the one hand, but which also wants to remain a very strong friend of Israel, that is a real huge dilemma coming up for it. The United States will not likely consider the court in relation to its arms exports, which are, of course, quite massive. The United Kingdom may be in a different position because under its ministry...
The only thing Germany loves more than defending Israel is following rules. That's what we're seeing here. Yes, that is a major downfall for those who want to unconditionally support Israel, because if the ICJ or the ICC rules against Israel, Germans have to follow those rules and follow those orders. There's just nothing they have to. You could solve this entire problem if you made a rule in Germany somehow that it's illegal to say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Tomorrow they would be like, okay, I've decided it is no longer the case. I love the rules. I have to follow the rules. Yeah, there's nothing else. Remember, during the Nuremberg, one of the defenses launched by Nazis, we were just following the rules. Very anti-German to declare that to not be appropriate. Very anti-German for the court to say, well, sorry, that doesn't work in this situation.
Against international law, or certainly in favor of a campaign of genocide. These various pronouncements, again, make the space to maneuver for Israel and for its allies significantly smaller. Doesn't end the conflict, but it is another piece in the mosaic which will help, I think, persuade.
If Germans love the law, why aren't they speaking out against the crimes that Israel's already committing in violation of international law? This doesn't make much sense. Are you kidding me? It's because it's illegal to criticize Israel in the state of Germany. That's why there's a rule against it. Dude, Aryan-looking motherfuckers are arresting Jewish Germans for the crime of anti-Semitism as we speak, without a hint of irony.
Israel ultimately to try not to isolate itself entirely from the international community.
How much then of a defeat is this for Israel?
Well, it certainly adds to the list of defeats that I think Israel has experienced in this case along the way. Israel all along has urged the court not to take this step, making the argument that this would leave Israel unable to defend itself when it's involved in an ongoing conflict.
Totally.
But this really means that the court has found that there is simply no other way at this point to preserve the rights at issue in this case, the rights of the Palestinian population in Gaza, not to be subject to acts that might meet the legal definition of genocide. I do think that the court, the order just came out. I haven't had a chance to completely comb through it in detail, but as far as I can tell, the court didn't say anything about what this legal.
It's odd, but the reality of the matter is all Israel had to do after October 7th was not go as gung-ho on the entire Palestinian population. All they needed to do, if they wanted to maintain their apartheid, if they wanted to keep it going, all they had to do was just not react this way, not react the way that they did, and the rest of the world would 100% would have went along with it, as they have done, as they've done so, turned a blind eye to the apartheid as they've done so. But nope, they had to go nutty mode. They just could not contain their anger and resentment and just behave in the way that they have. I think it is the arrogance that was firmly planted by 75 years of negligence from the Western world that caused them to think like, oh no, we can just do literally whatever the fuck we want and the rest of the world will have our backs in the same way. And if they don't, then fuck them. They're anti-Semitic. It's crazy. And reinforcing that behavior, which Joe Biden did with his bear hug, was probably another, like one of the worst things you could have done. Like going to Israel and being like, nope, you have the go ahead. No red lines. I'm giving you a symbolic bear hug. Absolutely awful.
Leaves Israel with the ability to do. But I think it can't really be construed to mean that Israel is no longer allowed to defend itself if Israel suffers.
There was a red line though. Are we all just getting transitive Alzheimer's from Joe Biden? No. 9 days after October 7, Joe Biden went to Israel and said there are no red lines. The red line that you're talking about is Rafah. The recent red line that you're talking about was about Rafah, which Israel has violated, by the way, very openly. And it doesn't even fucking matter because it's obvious that Biden is just like consistently redrawing that red line conveniently around the boundaries of wherever the Israeli occupying force is. He set a red line, but it was lip service, as evidenced by the fact that Israel violated that red line very quickly and said, nah, we're going to go into Rafah. You, and is currently in Rafah, and yet all that came from that was a partial suspension of weapons delivery. Meanwhile, Blinken literally said there are no red lines, reiterated that, and as you can see with your eyes, like it doesn't really matter. There is no real red line.
Mr. Becker, what does this ruling mean for countries that support Israel? And of course, I'm thinking of the United States here, for example, with weapons and other military aid. Are they on a slippery slope right now?
I think that was already the case since the court's order in March. And this really does put the Biden administration in a difficult position. The Biden administration had already suggested that if Israel were to proceed with the military offensive in Rafah, that this would be kind of a red line for the U.S. And we did see that at least some limited shipments of weapons were withheld.
Yeah, dude, totally. That was a real mechanism of enforcement there. America is doing its very best to stop Israel and definitely enforcing their red lines totally. Do not believe what you have seen so far. Do not listen to the conversations coming from American Congress about who they have declared the real enemy here. Seemingly, it's always anyone and everyone that dares criticize Israel. What's that about? Like, they have so much more smoke for those who say what Israel is doing is wrong than what Israel is doing. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the ICJ can go to hell. It is long past time to stand up to these so-called international justice organizations associated with the UN. Their anti-Israel bias is overwhelming. The ICJ is ruling that Israel should stop operations that are necessary to destroy 4 battalions of Hamas fighters and terrorists who use Palestinians as human shields is ridiculous. This will and should be ignored by Israel. Yeah, Lindsay, I trust Israel more than America. Graham, the ICJ ruling doesn't have any effect besides adding another layer of diplomatic pressure. How many more layers do we need to force Israel to stop because they seem hell-bent on ethnically cleansing every child in the Gaza Strip at all costs? Dude, these things take time, man. You can't look at it in that way and be like, oh, dude, even more mechanisms of pressure. No, I guess I have the benefit of seeing this with a 10-year understanding, at least. Like, as I have covered this conflict for the past 10 years, I have never, ever seen this level of support for Palestinians ever. You're talking about something that was firmly established and wasn't even called into question ever for 75 years. It's going to take some time. You can't just like dismantle it, that level of unconditional support. This is huge. These are incredibly positive steps in the right direction. Because once again, something to consider here is that this is not just against Israel's ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign. This is against American empire as well. And that is impossible to dismantle, seemingly. Even harder to dismantle than Israel's genocidal ambitions and Israel's apartheid. That's the reason why it seems like a massive hurdle.
I think the court's order today then puts further pressure on the Biden administration to say enough is enough. Now is the time for Israel to step back and find a different way to manage this conflict.
Michael Becker, Assistant Professor of International Human Rights Law, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and helping us analyze this story, this breaking story here, the court ordering Israel to stop its military campaign in Rafah. Thank you.
Thank you.